All right, let's go ahead and keep going with our part 5 of our video lecture for chapter 12 on the Crusades. Or on post-classical Europe. Now we're looking at the Crusades. The Crusades is one of many examples of European expansion. So the Europeans started expanding, the Western Europeans particularly, started expanding not only across Europe and eventually into the Middle East, but also even across the North Atlantic with the voyages of the Vikings. Remember, the Vikings are going to set up colonies in the North Atlantic, places like Iceland and Greenland, and also Vinland, right, in North America. And the famous explorer was called Leif Erikson. We're also going to see the expansion of Christianity through force, through violence, in where Germanic knights who have converted to Christianity want to show off how Christian they are, and they go and they conquer places of Central Europe and Northern Europe called the Baltic and the Scandinavian states. All right, so Germany would be right here. Come on, right there. Germany would be right there, and they're going to start going eastward. They're going to start going northward into the Scandinavian and Baltic areas to conquer those areas and convert them to Christianity. So we see that Northern Europe, Western Europe, and even parts of Eastern Europe are now going to slowly start becoming Christian, more specifically Catholic Christians. Catholic forces, of course, we're also going to see how the Catholics are going to go into Italy, because southern Italy used to be ruled by the Islamic Caliphate, and then they were kicked out by the Byzantines, and then the Byzantines were kicked out by the Catholics. We're also going to see how Italy becomes 100% Christian, and even Spain, as we mentioned before, became 100% Christian during this time period as well. Now, the most famous, of course, of the Crusades is the First Crusade, because it was the only one that was successful, even though it was a temporary success. So what were the Crusades all about? Well, in the Middle East, right, in the Holy Land, which is this area around here, sometimes they call it the Levant. Nowadays we call it Israel, or Syria in Israel, or Lebanon in Israel. And all these, this was holy sites, of course, that's the birth of, the birthplace of Christianity and the death of Jesus. So this is a holy area, holy city, holy land for Christians. But it's also holy land for Muslims, because the Muslims controlled it, and Muhammad had supposedly gone to Jerusalem and lived there, or went to heaven from there. And it's also a holy site for Jews, because the Jews, that was their ancestral home, was Jerusalem, their capital of their, ancient kingdom of Judea. So it's a holy area, sacred area for all three religions, and they're all going to, or at least the Christians and the Muslims, are going to argue and fight over who gets to control it. So for a long time, Jerusalem was opened up to pilgrimages, right? So Christians from the Byzantine Empire, or Christians as far away as Western Europe, could travel safely to the Holy Land and go to Jerusalem and pray, without any problems. And the Muslim rulers of this territory of the Levant, for a long time they had no issues, right, with letting Christians and coming here to pay respect to the religion, because they get to charge taxes. That was the whole thing, right? But then with all the issues of the Islamic Empire, we see the rise of the Seljuk Turks. And the Seljuk Turks, they kind of, not only are they're attacking the Byzantine Empire, but then they also, because they're at war, they cut off this route, right, this pilgrimage route. And they say we can't allow Christians coming in because we're at war with the Christians, or at least with the Byzantine Christians. So the Byzantine emperor sends a letter to the Pope, asking for help, asking to send soldiers to help us fight against these Muslims and help us recapture this Holy Land, because the Muslims, the Jews, are infidels, right? They're non-believers, they're not Christians, and they shouldn't be there. So the Byzantines are asking the Pope for help. Now, mind you, this is about 50 years after the Great Schism, right? where after the Pope and the Byzantine Emperor fought each other and decided to go the separate ways. So the Pope sees this as the perfect opportunity for him to extend his political power. His name was Pope Urban, to extend his political power and authority, because he's going to send armies to save the day and prove that he, of course, is the one true voice of God here on earth, and that the Byzantine Emperor doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. So this is how it all starts, right? The Seljuk Turks are expanding their empire, their territory. They're attacking the Byzantine Empire. They are closing off the pilgrimages to Jerusalem, and this is viewed as an attack on Christianity. This is viewed as an attack on the Byzantines. Byzantines ask for help, and the Pope is going to help them. What is the Pope going to do? What is the Pope going to do? Right. So the Pope sends all these soldiers. He sends all these soldiers, thousands and thousands of soldiers, go during the First Crusade, and they're successful. They recaptured Jerusalem. They set up what are called Crusader states or Crusader kingdoms. You see them up here, right? So these different kingdoms ruled by European nobility, right, who went to Europe, went from Europe and fought in the Middle East. Now, most of the participants are going to be French people, but also Germans, English, even some Spanish people. And why? Like, why would you leave your home if you're especially if you're a noble? Like, why would you leave your homeland where you have land and you have wealth and you have power? Why would you leave it to go all the way to the Middle East, right? And there's 2 or 3 different answers, right? The political reason is increase your status, right? Because if you go in and you fight, then you can gain greater titles of nobility. So many knights looked over this opportunity to increase their political power, right? Maybe become lords somewhere. There's also the economic idea that you're gonna go capture land, you're gonna steal stuff, you're gonna win wealth, right? Gain wealth from conquering the Muslims in the Middle East. And of course there was the religious reason, which is probably the primary reason, in that people were motivated because they were super religious. Remember, Europe was very, very, very religious. Now, part of the motivation is what we call is what the Pope promised. And the Pope said that there will be a remission of sin, meaning that your sins will be forgiven if you go and you fight on the name of God, right? On behalf of God. You take on the cross and you go fight. And this will eventually lead for you to be sent to heaven. So, because if your sins are forgiven, your soul is clean, your soul is cleansed, you can go to heaven. So Christians are leaving their homeland for economic, political, and religious reasons to launch these attacks against the Muslims. And like I said, they're going to be successful, but only temporary, because they're going to control the Holy Land, set up these countries, set up these Crusader kingdoms for about 100 years before the Muslims take it back. And there's going to be multiple other crusades that come after, and none of them are really going to be as successful as the first one. The first one, of course, is always the best one, right? So the Muslims, of course, they're going to recapture it, because not only is Jerusalem a holy city to them, not only was this territory that they ruled for a long time already, but remember, the Muslims also have religious motivations, because under Islamic belief, there's the concept of jihad, where if you fight and die in the name of Allah, spreading the faith, you get to go to heaven too, or paradise. So the Christians and the Muslims are going to fight each other for over 200 years over these crusades, right? And they're going to have, political, economic, but also religious motivations to continue this fighting. Now, the kings of Europe looked to expand their power during this time. Because if I'm a king, remember, the kings have to share their power and their land with their nobles, with their lords, with their knights. And they needed to do this in the earlier time frame, right, especially in the Dark Ages, when there was a constant threat of violence and invasions from Viking, Magyars, and Moors, right, and Muslims. But by this time, we're looking at the 1100s now, there is no more invasions. right? There's fighting between the different European kingdoms, but invasions isn't that big of a deal anymore. So you don't really need those nobles protecting your land. You could do it yourself now, like kings used to do. So if I'm a European king, I'm going to be more than happy to send my lords and knights to go fight, because chances are they won't come back. Or they'll stay over there, or they'll die over there. Who cares? But once they leave, that means all that land is mine again. I don't have to share it anymore. And their power and their authority belongs to the king again. So the kings are going to support this. The Pope is going to support this. There's going to be a whole bunch of people supporting these crusades, and even though they're not going to be very successful in the long run. There's always an exception, and crusade number 4 is going to be the exception. So what happens in the crusade number 4, the Fourth Crusade? So the Italians are going to make big time money from the crusades because all the Europeans are going to Italy to get on a port, to go to a port city, and get on a ship and sail to the Holy Land. So places like Venice are going to grow in wealth. Places like Genoa and Pisa as well, right? These city-states of Italy. And Venice is going to start competing with Constantinople, right? Because they want to compete for trade routes in the Eastern Mediterranean. So all these knights come to Venice and say, okay, we need to get on a ship and go to the Holy Land. And the Venetians tell these knights, we'll go there, but first we got to stop in Constantinople. And so they go to Constantinople, and the Byzantine emperor sees these knights coming in, and he opens his gates and he lets them in because he thinks, oh my God, these are our saviors, right? They're going to come and help us fight against the infidels, fight against the Muslims. But the Venetians and the knights already had an agreement that they're not going to go anywhere. They're going to go to Constantinople, they're going to steal stuff, they're going to kill people, and then they're going to go home. And that's what they do. They kill a whole bunch of, Byzantine people. Remember, the Byzantines are Christians. They're Orthodox Christians, but they're Christians. But to the Western European Christians, to these Western European knights, there was no difference, right? These Byzantines, they spoke a weird language because it was Greek. And they dressed weird because they were Easterners. And even though they, were supposedly Christians, they didn't pray like the Western European, the Catholics prayed. So they killed a whole bunch of Byzantines. The city got sacked, the city got destroyed, and the Byzantine Empire never recovered. And from there, it was a rapid decline, right? And this was so horrible that even the Pope said, hey, this is messed up. This is ungodly. Is what he described it as. So, what are the effects of the Crusades, right? First one, we mentioned already, the kings become more powerful because they don't have to compete for power with their nobilities, with the nobles. The Pope loses power because the Pope had all this authority and power at the beginning of the Crusades because he's able to launch these wars, right, and convince everyone to go fight. But by the end of the Crusades, after these Crusades have failed, and remember the Pope is saying that God is with them, the Pope's authority declines across Europe after the Crusades. The tensions between Muslims, Christians, and Jews continues to grow, and some of the tensions, of course, are still present in modern day Middle East. But we also see probably the longest and most important effect is the increase of trade. Because these European knights who travel to the Middle East and live in the Holy Land, when they come back home, they bring Chinese silk, they bring Indian spices, they bring Muslim goods, they bring ivory from Africa. They bring the luxury goods that Western Europe has not had access to for the last 500 years during the Dark Ages. So the Europeans are going to be reintroduced into the luxury goods, right? Those interregional trade networks. And they're going to want to participate in it. And that's going to be the longest and most important effect of the Crusades. New ideas, right? Oh, because the Europeans are going to come back with ideas about gunpowder. They're going to come back with paper and books and compasses, right? All these technologies that were found in Asia, right, are going to finally make their way into Western Europe. They're going to bring in spices and silk and rice and citrus, right? Rice comes from Asia, citrus comes from India, sugar from India, right? These crops are already spread throughout the Middle East and spread throughout through Dar al-Islam. But now it's finally going to make its way to Europe, and it's going to start changing the way Europeans do things. And like I've already mentioned, monarchies grow stronger, the Pope grows weaker, the nobility grows weaker, and Europe unites, at least culturally speaking, they unite, because they're united as Christendom, right? They're not united politically between French or Germans or English, but they're united culturally as part of Christendom. That's another effect. All right, we'll talk more about this stuff in our next video.